What I want to talk about here is how to tell by looking at a tree what it is you cut off when you cut off a branch and what should remain on the tree. A lot of people don't realize, but the base of a branch is important tissue that needs to stay on the tree after a pruning cut is made. Now, it used to be thought that you made a flush cut when you cut off a branch, and that was proper. On the other hand, some people leave stubs when they prune, and that's not good. Same as doing a flush cut isn't good, because stubs lead to sprouts and decay. Flush cuts lead to dieback and decay into the stem of the tree. And here on this branch, we can see pretty good. The branch comes down here at a fairly constant diameter, getting a little bigger as you come down, but there's a swollen base to the branch right here. It's called the branch collar. Think of it as around the base of a neck like a collar. That's the branch collar. This is actually trunk tissue, wood from the trunk, and water goes up through that and then goes on past the branch up to branches up above. So you don't want to cut into that material, that branch collar. Here we have a branch bark ridge, which is also a sign of, or a breaking point you might think of, between trunk tissue and branch tissue. So you don't want to cut into the branch bark ridge either. So you want to cut the branch off like this, removing all the branch you can, but leaving this swollen base. That'll minimize the amount of sprouting that occurs, and it'll use the tree's natural defense system to help promote healing of that wound that you're causing. And when you prune a tree, unless you prune off a branch that already died, you are causing a wound. The idea is to minimize the size of the wound and help the tree use its natural healing or sealing process to seal up that wound. Okay, so there's our proper pruning cut there. If we want to look down here a little bit, here's a pruning cut that was made, from the looks of it, probably 2 or 3 years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And the branch bark ridge here was left on the tree, so it was not a flush cut up here at the top. And it looks like it was pretty good down at the bottom too. Typically, a good pruning cut will actually slope out a little bit from the tree. It won't be flat back in, but it depends on how these structures are set up on the tree. We are getting a little bit of dieback here at the base of this wound, and I'm peeling back loose bark, dead material. I haven't yet peeled into anything that's alive. Over on this side, though, you can see there is wound wood, sometimes called callus, that is forming. And that's what will happen after a pruning wound is made, or really any kind of wound on the stem of a tree or on a branch of a tree. The cut surface, the cut edge of the wound will start to generate tissue that's called wound wood or callus, that is actually wood with bark on it, and eventually that'll come over in kind of a roll until it closes the wound up. The wound is still inside, but that tissue closes it up so that water and minerals can keep on moving up the tree, and eventually you won't even know there was a pruning wound there. This one does have a little dieback on this side, which has me concerned some, but it appears that callus is forming under the branch right about back here, so it's probably going to be okay. It may have been a little too flush of a wound. Here's another wound, a good pruning wound as it turned out. And I should mention, sometimes you don't know. You make what looks like the proper pruning cut. You're using the targets or the clues on the outside of the tree, the branch bark ridge and the branch collar, and it just doesn't work out and you get a little bit of dieback. But this one turned out really well. This is actually on a very vigorous silver maple tree. We've got the branch bark ridge going down up one side through the crotch of the branch. It used to be here. And then down the other side, and the swollen base of the branch was left. This was made 2 years ago, right about this time of year. As soon as that cut was made on about a 2-inch diameter branch, shortly after, wound wood formation started. It's coming in kind of a donut shape, and that's a sign of a good wound. If you get dieback at the top or the bottom, often that means too flush of a cut, and that can lead to problems. But this is real good. It's got a little bit left to go before it's closed it completely. I want to mention with this one, since the branch bark ridge is so distinct here, why it is that forms. A branch bark ridge is the excess bark formed from the branch and the excess bark from the trunk meeting and pushing against one another, and they usually turn out the way this has. Here's a little nub of bark here. On an older silver maple, you'll actually get shreds of bark coming out of these crotches. And if it turns out like this, that's good. You've got a good branch connection, what used to be this branch connected to this larger branch. If it turns in, and we'll see that in a minute, on another tree, it means you have included bark that can go all the way into the base of this branch, and that means you have a weak union, and often that's a good place to remove a branch when you have included bark. Okay, so this branch bark ridge then is just a record of the growth of this branch ever since it was young off of this bigger branch. The situation here is a Norway maple tree that a very large pruning cut was made on just a year ago. And this was done because corrective pruning hadn't been done earlier in the life of the tree, and is a good excuse for mentioning that as much as possible prune early in the life of the tree, early in the life of a branch, so you don't need to make such a large wound. One thing I want to point out here, part of the reason this large branch was removed is it had developed included bark, and this hole right up in here, this groove, is actually where bark from the trunk and bark from what used to be the branch met and folded down inside instead of folding outside the way it should into a branch bark ridge. What happens when that occurs is the branch is growing against the trunk down inside, and you actually get decay and dieback inside, and that's a terrible place when you have a very heavy branch attached to a very heavy trunk. Leads to decay and problems, and it maybe eventually the branch breaking out. So this was removed anticipating those problems. Now it's been 1 year, one growing season. We are getting good woundwood or callus formation pretty much all the way around here, not too much here at the top where the included bark was, and that may be partly due to the included bark. And then there's woundwood formation on the other side of the wound. It doesn't appear that there's any occurring here, but it's been a year, and if you look down, you can see this is the tight bark that doesn't have much going on underneath it. Matter of fact, it's probably dead. But right here, there's a swollen area, and we can actually trace around the base of the wound where underneath there's woundwood formation occurring. So there is healing occurring in this case. But this certainly is not an ideal situation. Cutting such a large branch off can take many years for it to heal, and there's a lot of problems that can occur because of the amount of time it's taking for it to heal. Here we've got an extreme case of included bark, where essentially the entire branch base is becoming buried by the trunk growth. The trunk's actually growing right around included bark down into here without a normal branch bark ridge. And this is going to be weakly attached with a good chance for decay and dieback occurring down inside the crotch here. And the problem is, on this tree, which is an aspen, this particular tree, the genetics of it are such that every branch is like this. We're getting included bark in every branch. And for one thing, it makes it hard to cut off a branch like this properly. It's hard to get down in there. But also, if we cut off every branch on this tree that had included bark, we'd cut off every branch. There are none without included bark. Another example of that, and a really common landscape tree, is little leaf European linden, where essentially every branch ends up with included bark. On those types of trees, if we're going to have them in the landscape, we just need to live with it and watch for signs of failure of these kinds of branch junctions. That'll be decay and also cracks that sometimes occur through that crotch where weakness is starting to pull it apart, and then prune those off. and lots of times you end up with a tree that just needs to come out. And here finally we've got a completely sealed over pruning wound. The wound ridges have closed all the way, knitted together. We've got the branch bark ridge that was left on. This may have been a little bit of a flush cut at the bottom because it doesn't look like there's much branch collar left. But all in all, it is sealed over. We don't use the term healed much in speaking of tree wounds because unlike humans and animals, tree wounds still exist down inside even after they've been covered up. And there still may be defects inside the tree associated with this wound. But it is covered over, decay will be minimized now, and the tree can get on with building stem, building trunk over where we made that wound. And eventually you may not even know that this wound was there. So remember, when you make pruning wounds, or when you prune on trees, you want to remove all of the branch that you can without cutting into trunk wood. And to do that, you've got two targets you look for on the tree: the branch bark ridge on top and through the crotch of the branch, and the branch collar, which is often swollen, and that's the base of the branch, and that's really trunk wood inside that branch collar, at least partially. You want to leave those two targets intact and cut just outside them without cutting too far out and leaving a stub. And if you're ever unsure about things, make the wound a little farther out on the tree, leaving a tiny little bit of a stub, because eventually you could come back and recut that, but you don't want to flush cut. Don't ever flush cut and err on the side of going too deep.